Hello, and welcome to The Humanistic Counselor, a podcast in which we discuss, analyze, critique, and celebrate both well-established and cutting-edge ideas across the field of humanistic counseling. I'm Brett Wilkinson, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Humanistic Counseling, otherwise known as JHC. I'd like to welcome Dr. Melissa Fickling, Associate Professor in the Department of Counseling and Higher Education at Northern Illinois University. Her scholarly interests include advocacy and social justice, the history and philosophy of counseling, clinical supervision, and career counseling. She has practiced professional counseling in higher education, community, addictions treatment, and private practice settings. In today's interview, we'll be discussing her October 2023 position paper published in JHC entitled Greater Than the Sum of Its Parts, A View of Professional Counseling, Grounded in History and Looking Toward the Future. First of all, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Brett. It's good to be here.
In your 2023 JHC article, you argue that humanistic counseling, career counseling, and social justice collectively offer a conceptualization and training framework that aligns with our professional values in the counseling field. You also suggest that these three interactive areas beneficially inform professional identity development in a way that addresses client needs in a complex world. So to start, can you explain your view of the three dyads that emerge when you look at the relationships among humanistic counseling, social justice, and career issues?
Yeah, certainly. I think everyone, I don't think it's controversial to say that any one of those three stands on its own and is central to who we are. I think students, new counselors, we get that message pretty loud and clear. I also think we've done a good job, or some folks have done a good job of acknowledging those dyads. So any two of those three. And so in the article, I kind of share some core sources that have done that in the past that have really been formative to me. So I can let's start with humanism and career. I think those are the ones that I started with professionally. Um, I think what these share in common is I think you'll most commonly hear people say work is a path to meaning, to finding meaning, right? Or it can be. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it certainly ideally is. I feel that way. I feel very fortunate that I have work that feels deeply meaningful. And so that's a natural point. I think where we tend to lose people a little bit is when we start to talk about career touching a lot of these existential themes, right, of loss and death and meaninglessness, because that's certainly the case. I think especially when people lose work or don't have access to work or are in a precarious work situation. So I spend a lot of time when I teach career talking about that population of folks, because I think David Bluestein's work was the first to really highlight that's actually the majority of the experience for the working world. If we're taking a global perspective, is that choice is actually not much of the equation for a lot of folks. And so we have to acknowledge that. But I think a humanistic angle on career is also that work can be a source of empowerment and power. So I think there's just a lot of natural alignment there that feels very natural to me as a counselor. Now, when I'm in a clinical space, I'm often seen as the career person because I do always see work. And when I'm in a career place, I'm seen as too clinical, too humanistic, because I'm very much attuned to emotion and subjectivity and the personhood. So again, that feels like a natural place for me, and I think a lot of counselors, but it's been explored somewhat in the literature. That's the first dyad. We can talk about career and social justice. There wasn't much written about this early in my career, but I think we're turning a corner on that as a profession. There are some voices that are very out in front of this. I think of Christian Chan and I think of like Brian Hutchinson have done some writing around this, but and really Frank Parsons, the father of vocational guidance, was driven by social justice motivations, right? Serving poor people, working class women, young people. So these overlaps have been somewhat explored, especially recently, but I think career counseling has not done a good job prior to that of acknowledging um, who they were serving, right? They were serving, again, a privileged few for the most part. Um, and I think we're still wrestling with that image today of like career counselors being those who help people navigate systems and institutions in quote unquote respectable ways. And that is a place that makes me somewhat uncomfortable. I'm kind of depoliticizing career counseling, I think. Um, and career is not the only specialty that does this. But, I came of age as a counselor, I guess, in the wake of the Great Recession. I mean, that's when I started my clinical work was the month the Great Recession really hit. And so there was no avoiding the social justice or injustice in the work world for the folks I was serving, most of whom did not have access to higher education, most of whom were low income people. So again, that just was part of my upbringing, and I'm always surprised when people don't automatically see how career work is deeply intertwined with social justice work. So again, I'm glad that there's a lot more dialogue and acknowledgement of this, and we still need the folks who write resumes and say, "Here's how to do an interview." Most of us need to work, and we need to navigate those systems in a way that keeps us healthy and safe. And but I think if we stop there and we don't actively and um, acknowledge identities and systems of power, we're not really serving our clients as well as we should. And then the third dyad is humanism and social justice, um, which again, there's this emphasis on empowerment, this acknowledgement that we have a hierarchy of needs. Counselors love to refer to the hierarchy of needs, but self actualization is not limited to those who have stable housing and are safe and all of those things. So I think humanism and social justice share this commitment to authenticity and congruence and wellness, but wellness from a culturally sensitive and culturally responsive framework, and centering the benefits and the richness of human diversity as a strength, not as something to work through and work around. So yeah, that consideration of complexity and context is what brings humanism and social justice together pretty naturally. So yeah, when you bring those three together, I think ideally this looks very smooth in practice and very just integrated. But unfortunately, I don't feel like that often happens in our spaces. And I think one or two of these three often get dropped for lots of reasons we could do a different interview about. But
Mhm.
that's kind of where I started with the dyads.
Right. Okay. And so you explore this very clearly in the position paper, and part of what you're articulating is that these three dyads. I mean, here's the background and research which you
Mm-hmm.
provide,
Mm-hmm.
and also that an integration of these three perspectives really speaks to the professional identity of counselors in particular, and that
Mm-hmm.
this has tremendous value. You want to speak a bit more to that value of the three and integrated combination?
Yeah. I think, I've worked in a lot of interdisciplinary settings, and I've also worked a lot exclusively with professional counselors. And I think we are losing, we create that false dichotomy again between personal and non-personal stuff, and we often refer out. And I think we're losing important history and important ground, and again, an important richness for clients when we do that referring out piece. So I'm always kind of the advocate saying, counselors, you can do this. Therapists, you can do career work. There's nothing different about this than any other thing someone's going to bring to you. Um, so that I think is a huge implication of like building up our. I'm a counselor educator, so I'm going to say students, but building up our students' confidence in this area and recognizing that this is within your scope of practice and it is part of what makes us unique. Because when I say career, and I usually try to say career and work, I'm not just talking about employment. I'm talking about the things humans do, you know, the projects they undertake, the things they work toward and spend time doing. That's work. And so that is certainly within the realm of what we do. Um, but yeah, I think we just lose sight of that. So that's often the piece that I'm having to more vocally advocate toward,
Mhm.
um, with students and when considering training needs.
Yes, and so part of what I took away when I read your article is you're really hitting on the fact that work, career, employment, and the meaningfulness is tied in with this. This is not ancillary to humanistic values. This needs to
Right.
be a central part of the kind of the holistic approach.
Hmm.
And you've already started speaking to this, but outside this interview, you mentioned to me your interest in what you called, and I'll quote you here. You said, "The precarious line we walk as professional counselors and counselor educators, where we want to instill pride in our profession and a strong professional identity, yet also prepare students for the interdisciplinary context they will work in." So,
Hmm.
would you like to expand on and explore that statement a bit for us?
Yeah, I think I named it this precarious line because it feels that way to me. It feels like I'm often in danger of misstepping or misspeaking in the wrong setting when I talk about counselors as part of the behavioral health professions. You know, I'm neglecting or denying somehow the uniqueness of professional counselors and our identity. And then when I am on the side of talking about how we are unique and why our title matters, I am not setting my students up for reality of their clients don't know or maybe care where they got their degree,
Mm-hmm.
or what program they came from, but that they will serve them ethically and see them as full, complex human beings. And when I work with other professionals from other disciplines, they also don't really, they're not super invested in what my degree is in.
Mm-hmm.
They're invested in my skills and how I treat clients. So that's what I want to prepare students for. I think what disheartens me the most when trying to navigate these conversations is that I see other counselor educators and other folks in our field almost disparaging other professions as they couldn't possibly be as holistic or grounded or humanistic as we are. And that's just not been my experience in working in interdisciplinary settings. So I'm not, I'm, I want students to be proud of their history and their profession and also not enter the field from this place of defensiveness or needing to defend who they are and how they're unique and different. It's like, yes, and both of these things are true. So, and I know other authors, and I don't have them at the top of my head, but other authors have acknowledged this tension that we're always navigating. And I don't think we've resolved it yet. And I don't know if we ever will, but I think we're at this interesting inflection point, with becoming Medicare providers and with the federal attention being paid to the behavioral health workforce and the shortages, that we are being kind of grouped together. And I think there's a lot of exciting opportunity in there, but I don't want us to lose who we are, who we have been in that. So that's the precarity, that's the line we're walking. And I am still very much figuring it out. And I feel for my students who are like trying to understand what it is I'm saying to them because I'm saying both of these things.
Both and, right?
Both and.
Yeah, both and. Okay. And so I appreciate you speaking to the tension there.
Mhm.
So, what do you see as some of the bigger implications? Let's go back a bit to
Mhm.
the three areas: humanistic, career, social justice. Let's talk about bigger implications. I think you've touched on that a bit here, but what would happen if the field were to collectively emphasize? Let's say everybody gets on board with this,
Mhm.
that these three areas need to be integrated in practice and training. What do you think would be the implication, the outcome for that? What would you like to see?
Mhm. I think we'd see a lot more integration of these three in all classes. I try to tell my students that these classes really feed into each other. I know one's called career and one's called multicultural and one's called theories, but ideally, it's one long socialization process, and you're not siloing off these subjects from one another. So I think that's for us to address as counselor educators or supervisors, to really try to check ourselves on how much are we integrating these three foundations. And I'm sure others could argue for three other foundations potentially, but I think these three have the strongest case. Obviously, I'm biased, but um, yeah, I think it would have implications for our training. I think I think this triad together requires all of us to have a little bit more of a advocacy stance, or maybe an activism stance perhaps, of being part of these interdisciplinary teams, but also pushing back against kind of the dehumanizing or the medicalization, um, even while even while being part of those communities. And that's something I don't see a lot of other professionals doing.
Mhm.
But I think counselors are actually best positioned to be that voice of dissent, healthy, respectful, client centered dissent, not kind of egotistical, profession centered, prideful dissent, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me, and I'm sure to
Yeah.
the audience too. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to share about your work?
Oh gosh. I really appreciate JHC and AHC for what they do, because this is where I feel the most creatively and critically engaged. Um, I love seeing articles that point to history. I think, other professions have kind of historical divisions that really dedicate time and intellectual energy to understanding that, and that's kind of where I am. I think that's just a reflection of where I am in my career, um, that I get to think about these bigger ideas and what they mean for us going forward. So that's where I am. I'm doing a lot of conceptual thinking and writing, and I'm sure, empirical research will come out of that. But um, I look forward to hearing from folks. I think I don't want or expect anyone to agree with me. I think healthy dialogue and debate and discourse is a sign of a healthy profession. And so let's engage in that and, you know, try to help each other navigate these tense but rewarding waters. I guess that's where I would love to see us go.
Fantastic. You've touched on this a bit, but let's go with one last question, which I'll be
Mhm.
asking everybody. What do you think is particularly important about humanistic counseling?
I mean, I think it keeps me in touch with my own humanity, right? I think this work, the high demands and the high stress of clinical work, can mechanize us to a certain extent. And anytime I engage with humanistic counseling, especially if there's been a break in reading or writing in this area, I feel myself kind of slow down and like ground into why I joined this profession in the first place. So that is a healthy reminder for me. I need that, because it's easy to get caught up in all the future talk, the clinical talk, the interprofessional dialogues. But yeah, I think humanistic counseling helps me remember my dissenting role and my commitment to clients and their humanity, and kind of serve as a counter pressure almost to medicalization and standardization. It's happening, it's going to continue to happen, and it's not in charge, I guess, to use some clinical metaphor there. But that's the value for me. I think probably a lot of folks would relate to that as well.
Thank you. Dr. Melissa Fickling, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And many thanks to you, good listeners, for spending time with us here at the Humanistic Counselor Podcast. All JHC articles can be accessed through the Wiley Online Library. If you're a member of the Association for Humanistic Counseling, then you get free access to this article and many, many others through the American Counseling Association website at www.counseling.org. If you'd like to become a member of AHC, then we hope you'll visit our website at www.humanisticcounseling.org. Thank you, be well, and hope to see you here next time on the Humanistic Counselor Podcast.